So welcome everyone. Again, we really appreciate you all joining live. We're looking to have another great live interactive discussion today with Frank Powell, Managecore's president and founder. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so turn your camera on, turn your microphone on. We just ask that you mute during Frank's presentation, but then after that we will have a lot of time for some Q&A. The other thing too is that we are recording this session, so please look for it on managecore.com. Invite colleagues or anyone else that wants to view these recordings after every session. They will be posted there live. So Frank, you take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Kristen. And those of you joining us today, we're trying to do this short series mainly just to provide some more information about some of the, I guess, common topics and things that people are most interested in. We're not trying to make them very salesy, although some of them do provide you product details. And today, I mentioned that because today's topic is one that could maybe be perceived as kind of a sales pitch. But more importantly, my perception of this is we really want to make you aware of some of the differences in Google's pricing model and some of the incentives they have, because for end customers, I think it's pretty valuable, especially for anyone who's thinking about moving their SAP workload into the cloud. So we're just going to cover today kind of quickly what some of those pricing models entail, some of the incentives that they have, and then if anybody has questions, feel free to ask. But mainly just to kind of pique your interest and understand how Google Cloud is priced and the incentives that are available for SAP customers. So with that, get my first slide to move forward. So when it comes to the baseline pricing model, all the hyperscalers, meaning AWS, Azure, and Google, if you look at their core pricing, and we just priced out an SAP landscape in all three, they would come in to be very close in price from one to the other. If you're actually comparing apples to apples, they're very close. And we always tell customers they should be within 5% of each other. And if you're getting pricing for those three different public cloud vendors and they're not close, then we tell people then there's something different about those configurations, because we price them out frequently ourselves, and we go through their pricing calculators, and the numbers for all the public clouds are out there and available. There's a website for each one of them that you can do your own pricing, right? So there's no mystery and there's no hiding what the costs are. But if there's a great difference between one and the other, we tell people there's probably something wrong. That's about where the similarities end, though. The base pricing is the same. However, how you get discounts, how you or the impact of pricing as you change your landscape, that's where the vendors really start to become different. For example, every one of the public clouds will tell you you can get a discounted price if you sign up and commit to using those resources for 3 years. And that's true. All three offer you pricing to do so. And honestly, if you looked at the 3-year discount, in a lot of ways, those would be probably pretty close as well. The problem, though, or the issue for an SAP customer is how those discounts are applied. For example, if you want the best discount for Azure, for example, you need to prepay the majority of that 3-year cost, right? So on one hand, you're getting a better price, but you're having to buy it all up front, or you're basically buying the discount up front. In a lot of ways, that kind of defeats the purpose of going to the cloud, because one of the main reasons, not for everyone, but one of the main reasons is to turn your capital expense on hardware or infrastructure into an operating expense, so now you can just pay month to month. Well, if you have to pay it all up front, you've kind of negated that one big reason why you may have went to the cloud in the first place. If you look at Azure, on AWS, for example, they're again unique in that when you want their best pricing for 3 years, you buy a virtual machine, and let's just use, because it's on the screen, a 12 terabyte system. You buy that 12 terabyte VM for 3 years, which means if you outgrow it or you want to use something different, you can certainly move and go to an 18 terabyte HANA appliance, or you can buy another one, but you still own the 12 terabyte appliance. So what that means is if you outgrew their 12 terabyte appliance and you had to go to an 18, you basically would own 30 terabytes of HANA, which you may not need. Now, AWS has a marketplace where you can go and try to sell the 12 to other AWS customers and try to sell to someone else. But again, kind of defeats the purpose of having that flexibility and moving in and out. So why is this important? if you think about your SAP landscape and how infrastructure works in the SAP landscape, SAP systems grow all the time. I don't think we've ever worked with an SAP customer where their landscape did not grow, right? Their databases grow, they turn on more products, they add app servers. So those systems always seem to grow. And the idea is you don't want to be locked into a particular size, or you don't have to want to pre-purchase capacity when you know that that capacity need is going to change over time. So if you contrast that with Google's approach to pricing, their approach is you get your best discount by just committing to a certain amount of CPU and memory that you will use over 3 years. So you're not locked into a singular VM. You don't have to prepay it with a lump sum up front. And as you grow, and we'll use the same example I used, if you grow from a 12 terabyte appliance to an 18, to get them still the same best price, all you have to do is pay the incremental difference between the 12 and the 18. So you'd pay the incremental difference of 6 terabytes, right? So that kind of takes us to that screen on the right where it says, hey, if you know over 3 years, you're going to need 12 terabytes of HANA. With some of the other vendors, you kind of almost need to get, again, to get the best pricing, you need to pre-purchase or commit to that 12 terabytes day one. Where in the Google example, what you need year one, and then year doing projects for 3 months, maybe upgrade. If you're on maybe HANA, 1511 and you're going at 1909, maybe you want to set up a separate landscape. The way Google does their pricing, it always turns out to be cheaper in the long term because you're only paying for that capacity while you're using it. They prevent lock-in that the other two, meaning AWS and Azure, try to get you to be locked into those prices. So the pricing model just inherently is more flexible. On the next slide, I just kind of have a little bit of graphic that kind of maybe more kind of demonstrates this need. And we have customers where we've done this for already, where they're running along, but during their busy season, they need to up the size of their environment only for a few months and then turn it back down. So again, in the Google model, and if we take this 32 CPU system, we may have, in this case, we do commit our customers to 32 CPUs, for example, over 3 years, so they get that best discount, right? For the 3 months where they actually need the 64 CPUs, they only pay that 34 CPU difference only for the period of time that they need it. Then when we take those resources away, they go back down to 32 and there's no more incremental cost. So the elasticity of the architecture from a pricing standpoint, because everybody talks about elasticity from an infrastructure, right? Well, I can grow from 32 to 64 and more, right? But think of elasticity as also a pricing mechanism. And Google's the only firm that really has that down to really makes itself more flexible. So what this amounts to is when you start to compare the pricing between AWS, Azure, and Google, you'll get those initial costs. And let's just say, for the sake of example, you have 80 servers in your landscape, and each one of them comes up with a price, and they all seem they're really close, right? So let's say they're $45,000 a month each, and you're saying, well, why would I pick one over the other? This is where it really starts to make sense. And the vendors don't talk in a lot of detail, and Google will because they know it's to their advantage. But you have to think about, how do you use your landscape? What is the potential for growth? How often do you use temporary systems, those sandboxes for a project? Are there other times when you may want to burst your workload for production only for a few months during your busy season? One of the things that our technical teams do is even think of when you refresh your QA system, right? A QA refresh generally takes a couple of days to run, and a lot of that runtime is restoring the database from production, and then a handful of these internal jobs that have to run to clean things up, to switch it from the production system to the QA system and rename it and things, right? Well, what we've done is for these really large systems where the runtime of those jobs takes a long time, for the 1 or 2 days we do this refresh, we will increase the resources on QA just for a day or two to make that process run faster. And let's say that amounts to giving that QA system back to the development teams 1 or 2 days ahead of time. There's real value in that. But the cost of the Google Cloud resources is literally a couple $100, even for the largest of systems, right? When you only use it for 2 days. So that's very easy to do using Google's pricing mechanism. Now, you can do that same technical objective in the other clouds. It's potentially just going to cost you more money. So again, think of how you use things and how your SAP landscape grows and is dynamic, and how that applies to the pricing that you might be paying. So that's just on the pricing model. The other thing I just want to talk about there, because there are certainly in 2020, Google also has some very attractive incentives for SAP customers specifically. So this isn't just for any workload. This is specifically for SAP workloads. And the first one is they will write customers a rebate check of up to 20% of what the 3-year contract value is of the Google spend. So let's just do some easy math here. Let's say, and again, it's a larger landscape, but to make the math simple, let's say your Google spend is $100,000 a month. 36 times 100 is 3.6 million over 3 years. And then 20% of that would be $720,000. So what that rebate means is if you committed to moving your SAP landscape to Google, and in this example of spending $100,000 a month, Google would literally write you a check for $720,000, which is there then to pay for your migration. Now, in that migration, it might be just the physical move. You might be able to upgrade to HANA, or at least pay partially for that upgrade to HANA. Maybe you can upgrade to S4, but that complete $720,000 can be utilized for any piece of helping you migrate your systems, and maybe even accounting for some transformation along the way, right? Those rebates, I say 20%. It actually could be slightly more than that. I've talked to some of our Google reps recently, and in some cases, they're going even as high as 25 and 30%. So a great rebate, which really mitigates the cost of the migration itself, which is obviously a big hurdle for folks. So that's the first one. The second one, in addition to the 20% rebate, they will actually offer you 6 months of GCP credits, which you can take for the first 6 months, or you can take those credits and divide them over the life of the contract. So what does that mean? Basically, the 6 months of credits are, again, using our example of $100,000 per month, 6 months would be $600,000. So the original reason they came up with this incentive is because if you're moving data centers, and let's say you're in a private cloud today, and you want to move, one of the deterrents for customers is, well, you're double paying for 2 hosting providers through the migration process, right? Until the productive go live, you've started spending money in the Google Cloud because you have to stand up the servers and you're testing your migration and you're moving dev and queue, before you get to prod, but you're also still paying the current provider. So this incentive was originally meant to offset that double payment while you're running through the migration. But what they found is a lot of customers said, hey, that's okay, but is there a way that I can just lower my monthly costs, over the life of the contract? So what they've done is, in addition to just giving you the first 6 months free, is the customer has the option to take that $600,000 in our example and just divide that by 36 and then lower your monthly fee over the life of the 36 months. So again, another nice incentive. And it's not an either or. You get both of those incentives if you move your SAP workload to the cloud. My last column just on competitive pricing is I just wanted to reiterate, as you look at pricing with different vendors, you are going to hear that they all sound about the same. But with these incentives and the unique way that that Google does their costing, really makes it attractive for SAP customers. So then my last box here on the right, what I've attempted to do is just give you a sample of not only the discounting on the migration and the rebate check, but what we've seen, and this is based on some real life examples of the cost of what a current private cloud hosted environment would be. So the hosting fees, and again, in the SAP world, when you go into the cloud, whether it be a private cloud or public cloud, usually there's a managed service with this. So I've included the basis managed services, but you could separate those if you wanted to. But in that first example of the private cloud, someone currently paying maybe $45,000 a month for the hosting and then another $20,000 for basis managed services. So their monthly cost, let's say, was $65,000. If you migrated that to the Google Cloud and had Managecore manage it for you, the cost would be about $15,000 difference, right? And what we're seeing and why this example is very valid in the customers we've moved and the ones we're helping and the ones we've proposed, we are seeing anywhere from a 20 to a 25% monthly savings over private cloud vendors. So that includes like SAP's HEC, for example, and other private cloud vendors that are out there. Now, the savings over on-premise probably aren't that great, but I think when people are looking to move from on-prem to the cloud, there's some other considerations there, right? It's the cost of the data center, it's the cost of the personnel to manage that. Maybe they have a cloud strategy. A lot of customers are adopting this cloud first, where every new initiative, they're trying to move that in the cloud and move things from capital expenses into operating expenses. So I don't have an example here of an on-prem scenario because I think there's different metrics that go there, and then the cost structures vary greatly. Is what we've seen. We talked to, one customer running SAP, what they believe their internal hosting costs for that would be are very different from another customer. If you're in that situation, though, we're happy to go and help model that for you and come up with some pricing to see if what that savings really would end up being. So in this example, again, if you're saving about 23% each month and you multiply that over 36, in this example, that's $540,000 over a 3-year period of savings that you would have, and that's just on the monthly fees, right? Not to mention that the cloud migration itself would be paid for. So Google's really taking a lot of the risk, and certainly the financial risk, out of a move like this, and making it pretty easy for folks. Now, understanding everyone has different size systems and what your configuration look like and what that costs. But if people have questions and would want Managecore to go through this exercise with you, being a Google partner, we can certainly do that. Having worked in the other clouds, Managecore can also do the pricing in Azure and AWS to show you what the competitive pricing looks like to make sure it truly is an apples to apples comparison. And happy to do so. So those were just the quick topics I wanted to talk about today. I guess before we end, any questions about that, or does anybody have any comments or anything they'd like to understand further? Yeah. All right. Well, as you can see on my screen, our next session is next Tuesday, April 7th. Again, we're trying to do these every Tuesdays and Thursdays. For those of you listening today, Tuesdays are kind of more SAP centric around SAP topics, and then Thursdays are going to be more cloud topics. So Tuesday is going to be kind of the evolution of the SAP landscape. And just a teaser on that, SAP landscapes 5-10 years ago, SAP had all these different products. Not only ECC and BW and BobJ, but SCM and SRM and HR and all these kind of things. Well, we're kind of seeing those landscapes shrink a little bit, but they're becoming more complicated just because of the interaction and the interfaces of things like that. Not to mention the move to S4 and the move to HANA changes that dynamic of managing and monitoring those landscapes as well. So that's going to be what that topic's about. So hopefully we can see some of you join us next Tuesday for that. So with
Frank,
that,
actually,
yeah,
we did have a few questions. One of the questions that I think, and you did touch on it a bit, especially with the incentives to migrate, but what is the typical process for migrating out of a private data center into the Google Cloud?
So it somewhat depends on which private cloud you're in and what the platform is. So let's take the simple example of you're in a private cloud today, but you're already running HANA and you're relatively current on the versions of products you're running. That would be very easily done as what we call the lift and shift, meaning we don't have to do any transformation. Sure. We can literally just take what you have and migrate it into the cloud. That is typically done with just backups of the database from the private cloud vendor. Although you can move VMs, most times the private cloud vendors won't let a third party have access to the virtual environment to move the virtual machines themselves. Sure. So what Managecore typically does is we'll stand up the new versions of SAP or the versions of SAP in the database, and then we'll just do database copies of the exact same landscape that you have. That's the most simplistic way to go through it. The other way is there are a lot of people that are in private clouds that are running I'll call it a legacy version of Unix and Oracle, for example. Like, so let's say you're on HPUX and Oracle. None of the cloud vendors support that exact environment, right? You can't run HPUX in the cloud. So we would then do a migration, what SAP calls a heterogeneous migration, where we would probably change platforms in that process. Maybe that's a great time to do Suite on HANA, meaning stay ECC, but run on the HANA database, migrate you to Linux. Again, SAP has a predefined process to do all of that work. We've done it many, many times. So it's relatively straightforward. And again, we would get backups from the private cloud vendor to move forward. One of the questions always comes up, well, what if I have a really large database? You know, how can you do that in a weekend, you know, with a backup to tape? So tape is we really don't use anymore, just to be clear. We usually back up to some like a USB device or something like that. However, we're doing a migration right now where the private cloud vendor agreed and the customer paid for it to just have a high-speed internet pipe. And through that high-speed internet pipe, we just created a VPN tunnel from the private cloud into Google. And we are literally transferring all their data files go live weekend over that VPN tunnel. So that can be done as well, and very straightforward and seamless. So there's a well-defined process, but sorry about that. But every landscape's a little bit different. But again, happy to talk through what your landscape may look like and what that migration project would entail.
Sure. So I don't know if there's any other questions on the line. We briefly touched on it a little bit of kind of the cost savings of 20 to 25%, but is there any other long-term benefits that you've seen Managecore customers in particular gain by running in the Google Cloud?
Well, I'll say twofold, and then just to be proud, say not only because you're running in the cloud, but having Managecore manage your environments.
Absolutely.
There's a couple things. Faster time to resolution for problems. One of the things Managecore has done is we have cross-trained all our basis folks in the cloud. So many of our basis team actually are certified cloud architects. So what that means is when you're troubleshooting a problem and it's an SAP and maybe it's a poor running, report or something of that, they can not only understand the SAP side of that and diving into the details of it, but if it turns out to be an infrastructure problem, our technical teams, understand the Google Cloud. So one person can kind of do all of the troubleshooting, and we actually have a number of tools that assist in this as well. But instead of having every request, whether it be just to look into a problem or to help fix the resolution, we don't open, I'll call them trouble tickets with multiple departments, wait for a response. Hopefully you get something in a timely fashion. So that's one differentiator. I think what you'll find is a lot of people go to Google also because their long-term vision is also they're interested in AI, they're interested in machine learning, they're interested in big data and analytics and things like that. And Google has some fantastic solutions in those areas. So again, many of our customers who have, first moved their SAP landscape to the cloud very quickly went into these other projects to take advantage of that. And now one of the things that made that possible was not only moving to the cloud, but moving to the cloud and having someone else manage your SAP landscape all of a sudden makes that or frees up your time from spending time managing your private cloud vendor or spending a lot of time managing infrastructure and the systems themselves. All that time is freed up now to work on new projects and innovate for your company and not get just stuck in day-to-day operations. So I guess those are two or three different ways we've seen kind of improvements from our customers.
Excellent. Great.
Okay.
Well, I think that about wraps it up. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Michael. We will see everyone on next Tuesday's session next week. Thanks again, Frank.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.